Our guest today is Kiwi author, book promoter and breast cancer survivor, Karen McMillan. Welcome, thanks. Karen, you've battled cancer, you've survived and thrived. Can you talk us through your experience, how you discovered the cancer and how was the treatment and your road to recovery?
Gosh, I actually will take you back a little bit. Cancer first affected my family when I was 15 years old, when my father was diagnosed with cancer. So he died when he was 48, and a couple of years later, my mum caught breast cancer, was diagnosed, and then she died. So obviously, having that experience, losing both my parents, I was only in my 20s. So I very much had a game plan with my GP of like, okay, what do I do? So I've always been very careful about having regular checks. And I was just going for my regular mammogram in 2011 when I got the bad news that I had breast cancer. But I tell you what, it's a positive story because they said to me straight away, we've got it early, we can fix this.
Wow, Karen, that's a huge story. And but 10 years now, I understand, since you've had breast cancer. That must be a good feeling.
Oh, I feel so blessed to make a decade. I think anybody that has gone through this similar forced march of treatments and diagnosis and all that will have met people along the way that didn't make it. So I do feel incredibly grateful and lucky. I do have to say, like, my everything that happened, the surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, I'm still on hormone therapy for a little bit longer. To every step of the way, I've had a fantastic medical team, and everything's gone as best as it could go. So I don't have a story of complications or things that went wrong. My story is of everything going really well. And like I've been a Christian since I was 8 years old. So I really felt God's hand in all of this. And I know this might sound a little bit romantic, but I really felt it was nearly a year of treatments. I really felt like I was cocooned by God's love. And it was such an experience that actually felt like a physical cocoon around me. So that really carried me through that time.
I mean, that is just an amazing story, Karen, and thank you so much for sharing. Now, you also shared that your diagnosis wasn't the start of your encounter with cancer. Both of your parents lived with it. So how did their story help you to reach out to others through your book, Unbreakable Spirit?
Gosh, well, Unbreakable Spirit, after, my parents' experience, I actually ended up doing volunteer work for my local hospice for quite a few years, writing stories, promoting the really important work that they do. So usually I'd be interviewing people, that have had someone in hospice or someone who was terminally ill. But one day they sent me to interview well-known author and broadcaster Mitch Albom, who'd written the book Tuesdays with Maury. So I went to interview and I was really nervous, because he's a very famous person. But he was so interested in me and the fact that I was a volunteer at that stage at a young age for hospice. So I told him a little bit about my mum and dad, and he turned to me and he said, "Girl, you've got a book there." So having this famous person tell me I had a book, I thought, well, maybe I should look into this. And that was the genesis of the first edition of Unbreakable Spirit, which came out in 2003. But it was revised after a dozen years. So it was a real privilege to get out there and, reconnect with people on the book and find out what had happened to them.
Karen, what key things have you learnt from your journey that you feel other women would benefit from hearing?
So certainly for anyone who's concerned about cancer or actually any illness, find out your family history if you can. Do have regular checks with your doctor. Like we take our cars to get serviced, once or twice a year. You should be doing the same for yourself with your human body. Make sure you've got a good relationship with a good GP, because honestly, when you go through these treatments, your GP is the central person that coordinates everything. So they're really important. And of course, mammograms and ultrasounds are really important. So, if you're due for one, don't put it off. So, if they catch it early, they can fix you. It's a very fixable disease if you catch it early.
Actually, I had a mammogram the other week, even in level 3 Auckland. So, yes, I would encourage a woman to go and do that. But actually, Karen, breast cancer is not just a female problem, is it? What words of encouragement would you offer to men?
Well, it's actually the same advice for men. So, just make sure you get those regular checks. So, and I guess for men, it's a little bit more complicated because they might have a layer of embarrassment around it. But, you're dealing with medical professionals if you do have a diagnosis, and they will look after you every step of the way. So also, I've got to say, like the power of prayer too. Like, even if you get like a big diagnosis, there could be a medical advance just around the corner. Can never just account, a miracle. Like I know many people that it's happened that the cancer's gone away without being able to explain, except the power of prayer.
I can imagine, Karen, that a support network must be very important for the path to healing. You've mentioned a little bit about this, but what kind of help did you receive through that time and then even after?
So I was so fortunate because I've got a wonderful family, a wonderful husband, wonderful friends, and I got so much support. So, and I think this is something when someone else is going through it, you can support people. And I want to say, like, if you find out a loved one or a family member that has been diagnosed with cancer, don't think they've had a personality transplant. All they've had is they've been diagnosed with an illness. So they might be unwell or depressed or, not quite themselves in that regard, but they're still the same person you know and love. So you can treat them the same way you've already have. So I would say, like people checked with my husband and me about how they could help me practically. So that's a huge help when you're going through treatments because, you're too tired to do things yourself. So my neighbour came round and cleaned the house for me. And honestly, when you're feeling really unwell, that's the best thing ever. And I had another friend who used to drive me to some of the appointments to give my husband a break. We went in a situation where we needed meals prepared because my husband's a really good cook. But there's so many practical things you can do. And also it's those, those little gifts and, some flowers arriving or some cards. Usually they come at just the right time when you're starting to feel a bit sorry for yourself. And then this wonderful little thing arrives and it just boosts your spirits. So you really feel like people are, are really caring about you, which is, is what you want at that time.
Karen, I'm just thinking about family members like your husband who obviously had to support you through cancer. What's important for them to know, especially when dealing with their own stress and emotions around this?
So I think the best thing is a couple if you can go to all the medical appointments together, because then you're getting the same information without one of you having to kind of translate it for the other. So I think it's really allowing your spouse to be part of what's going on. And I do remember my surgeon saying that breast cancer especially is a couple's disease. So couples need to really work together through this time. Because unfortunately, a lot of marriages and relationships break up when a woman goes through breast cancer. It just seems to be too personal for some men to cope with. So, but it's also making sure that, your husband gets a bit of time off, and does a few fun things away from you too. So it's not always, for the treatments you're going through.
Now, the End of Life Choice Act comes into effect in early November. If that had been legislated back when you were undergoing treatment, would that have discouraged you? And what would you say to patients and families affected by this new law who may already be feeling added stress?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Like I didn't have a terminal diagnosis, so actually it has nothing to do with me personally. But I do wonder about my mum and my dad, if that had been available. So I think, for me personally, I think everyone comes to this debate with a lot of compassion around it. But I do believe a lot of people also come to it with a lot of fear about death and thinking that it's not really a natural part of life, it's to be avoided at all costs. So I personally voted against the legislation just because I'm worried because it's going to mainly affect older people. But I'm lucky because, I'm part of a very nurturing, loving family, but not all people are. Not all people are going to have the support of people around them. So, and if they're coerced by family members, you're actually never going to know. So, and I do worry, like, when you get a diagnosis, you're naturally going to be down in the dumps about it for a little bit, but you need probably a bit of space around that. And I would wish for most people to be like my mother when she had her diagnosis of being a terminal illness. But she went on to live another 9 months of good quality living before the end. And I used to say to her, Mum, I don't know how you can be so brave. And she said to me that God gives you the strength when you need it. And honestly, she was really content. So, and she was living every day to the full. She wasn't waiting to die. She was living life fully. So that would be what I want for people. And personally, I would like to see a lot more resources go into hospice. And I would also like to see a lot more support around people at the end of their life to make sure that they are having those best days at the end. Can I just flag out one other thing? The other reason I'm not so keen on this bill is there seems to be no regard to the medical professionals. So I just worry about their emotional well-being. You know, it's one thing to be a medical doctor and someone dies naturally on your watch, but it must be so different if you're somehow part of them dying. So I worry about that side of things too.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. You've actually provided some very cool copies of some books to give away, four in fact, to our Shine viewers. Can you quickly tell us what these books cover and who you wrote them for?
Sure. So Unbreakable Spirit, we were talking about before, is 30 stories of cancer. So it's people that have survived cancer, people that are terminally ill, people that have lost people to cancer, medical people. The revised edition's got my story, my parents' story, my medical teams talk about everything. It's very much not medical treatments, it's the spiritual and emotional side of the illness. And the other book is Everyday Strength, which is recipes and wellbeing tips for cancer patients. So this is particularly for people when they're going through their cancer treatments. So half the book is wellbeing tips. So this will not cure cancer, but the aim is to make every day a little bit better. So if you're feeling very exhausted, for example, you can go to that chapter and have some everyday tips that you can do to make yourself feel a little bit better. Or you might be concerned about hair loss and the state of your skin. You can go to that chapter. So you can really go to whatever you're feeling concerned about. He's also got recipes. So I've got the lovely Sam Mannering, who does the Sunday Star Time recipe column. So he was actually going through cancer treatment himself when we were working on this book. So the recipes are very much designed for, your palate changes a lot when you go through treatments. So especially with chemotherapy, a lot of people complain that everything tastes of tin. So Sam's designed these recipes that are alkaline, not acidic. They're not invalid food. The whole family can enjoy them. They're simple recipes, so the idea is that the person who's doing the cooking might not be the usual cook. Then they're nutritious and tasty, and also they take into account that people facing cancer can either be losing weight or gaining weight. So there's recipes for both sides of the spectrum there.
Karen, what would you say to a woman, just in closing, who is at the start of her cancer journey and who may have just found a lump and is scared about what that could mean? What would you say?
So if you found a lump, just go and get an appointment straight away, go and get it checked. Because again, if you catch it early, they can fix it. And actually, even if you catch it late now, it's not going to be such a bad situation it was a decade ago. So don't be scared. If you leave it off, leave going to get checked, it's just going to be worse down the track. So just, be brave and go along and get it checked.
Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us this evening. We very much appreciate you sharing your story and your thoughts and, of course, these wonderful books as well. Thanks again.